So Elliot gets everything I asked. Mom smiled. You don't need anything from us. Sweetheart. What she didn't say was that I'd been paying their 1,475 mortgage for 6 years. The next morning, I stopped every transfer. 1 month later, Mom texted the mortgage is due. I replied, not my problem. I expected fury instead. Elliot called me first. Paige, why am I inheriting a house you've been paying for? That question told me something my parents had never planned for the person they chose over me might not want what they were giving him once he learned the price. Before we continue, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now, too. I had always been the easy daughter at 35. I was a demand planning manager for a food manufacturer in Kansas City. I owned a modest condo, had a stable salary, contributed to retirement, and rarely called my parents with problems I couldn't solve myself. That became my reputation. Paige is fine. Paige can handle it. Paige doesn't need much. 6 years earlier, my dad, Dennis, retired sooner than he expected, around the same time. My parents' house needed major work, and their monthly cash flow tightened fast. They refinanced. The new mortgage payment was about $1,475 a month. Mom mentioned selling the house once, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of bills beside her. I hated seeing her scared. Let me cover the mortgage for a few months, I said, just until you both get settled. A few months became a year, then 2, then 6. The payment went directly from my bank account to the mortgage servicer every month. Eventually, I added Mom and Dad to my phone plan, too. When the furnace failed, I paid the repair. When part of the deck needed replacing, I covered that. I wasn't bankrupting myself, but $1,600 leaving every month changes what your own life looks like. I postponed renovations on my condo. I saved more slowly. I said no to things I probably would have said yes to otherwise, twice. I brought up putting something in writing, not because I thought paying the mortgage made the house mine. I just wanted clarity. Mom looked hurt both times. Why make family into a business arrangement? Dad gave me the sentence that ended the conversation. That house will be yours someday anyway. So I trusted them. My cousin Elliot never seemed like competition. He was 38, married to Mara, had 2 kids, and worked as a field operations supervisor for an electric utility. His mother, my Aunt Colleen, had died years earlier, and Mom had always felt responsible for looking out for him. I understood that. What I didn't understand was how protecting Elliot eventually came to mean pretending I had never helped at all. Then, one Tuesday, Mom texted me, "We're updating our estate plan. We want you at Andrea's office Friday." I brought a notebook. I thought they wanted my help organizing everything. They had already organized it. I was the only thing they had left out. Andrea Fulton's office was quieter than I expected. No dramatic mahogany walls, no giant conference table. Just 5 chairs, a legal pad, and a folder with my parents' names printed across the front. Elliot was already there when I arrived. That surprised me. He stood and gave me an awkward half-hug. Hey. I looked at Mom. Why is Elliot here? She smiled, like the answer should have been obvious. Andrea thought everyone affected should understand the plan. That sentence stayed with me. Everyone affected. Andrea waited until we were seated, then explained that Mom and Dad had finalized a revocable living trust. They would still control their property while they were alive. Nothing was being handed over that day. Then she reached the part that mattered. After the second of my parents died, the remaining trust assets would pass to Elliot. I looked at her. The house? Yes. The savings accounts. The assets covered by the plan? Yes. And whatever is left after expenses. Andrea glanced toward my parents before answering. Elliot is the sole remainder beneficiary. I turned to Mom. And me. She reached for my hand. Nothing. I actually thought I'd misheard her. Then she squeezed my fingers. You don't need anything from us. Sweetheart. Across the table. Elliot straightened. Wait. I thought Paige was getting the accounts. Mom shook her head. She has her condo. She has a good career. She saves. Then she looked at him. You have Mara. You have the children. And after Colleen died, you didn't have parents left to build something for you. Elliot looked uncomfortable. Still, I didn't know Paige was getting 0. Mom's expression hardened slightly. Fair doesn't always mean equal. I looked at Dad. He had barely spoken. Is this what you want too? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. Your mother and I agreed. That hurt more than if he had blamed her. Mom squeezed my hand again. Nothing between us has to change. I looked at the woman whose mortgage payment was scheduled to leave my bank account in 3 days. Then I looked at my father, then Elliot. Nobody mentioned the mortgage, not once. Is the decision final? I asked. Mom nodded. Yes. Okay, that night. I went home and opened my banking app. The upcoming payment sat there exactly where it always had. $1,175. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the app. I wasn't going to make a decision angry. By morning, I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. Saturday morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and treated the whole thing like I was removing myself from a system that had been running on assumption. First, I canceled the recurring $475 mortgage payment from my checking account. Then, I stopped the monthly transfer into the savings bucket I kept for my parents' house emergencies. The money in that account was mine. I had just trained myself to think of it as already spoken for. Finally, I started the process of moving Mom and Dad's phone lines off my plan at the end of the billing cycle. I didn't shut off their phones. I made sure they had time to transfer the numbers into their own account. That was it. I didn't contact their mortgage company. I didn't touch their bank accounts. I didn't cancel anything in their names. I simply stopped sending my money. For 6 years. I had assumed helping was part of being their daughter. Now they had made something equally clear. Their estate was theirs to decide. So was my paycheck. I didn't send Mom an announcement. They hadn't asked whether I planned to continue paying after the trust changed. They had simply assumed nothing between us would change. For almost a month. Nobody mentioned the lawyer's office. That hurt more than I expected. Mom sent me a photo of flowers blooming beside her driveway. Dad texted once asking whether I knew a good brand of cordless drill. Nobody asked if I was angry. Nobody asked if I understood their decision. Nobody said, that must have been hard. And Elliot didn't call either. I told myself he was probably embarrassed. Then, exactly 1 billing cycle after the meeting, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing a production forecast at work. Mom. The message contained 5 words. The mortgage is due. No hello, no question. I stared at it long enough for my screen to dim. I started typing an explanation. 6 years. More than $100,000. The trust. Dad's promise. I deleted all of it. Then I typed, not my problem. Mom called less than 2 minutes later. What does that mean? It means I'm not paying the mortgage anymore. Her voice sharpened. You're punishing us because you didn't like the estate plan. You made an estate decision, so I made a budget decision. The trust has nothing to do with how this family works today. Then the mortgage has nothing to do with me. Silence. Then Mom said, we never said you weren't our daughter, and I never said you weren't my parents. You know we depend on that payment. You should have thought about that before deciding the person making it deserved no place in the plan. Mom exhaled hard. Fine. We'll ask Elliot. I expected him to call and tell me I was being selfish. Instead, that evening, my phone rang. His voice sounded nothing like I expected. Paige. Why did Aunt Lorraine just tell me you've been paying their mortgage for 6 years for a second? I thought Elliot was setting me up. You really didn't know. No. His answer came too quickly to sound rehearsed. They told me the house was nearly paid off. I knew Uncle Dennis retired early, but I thought they were managing fine. They weren't. How long have you been making the payment? 6 years. All of it, every month. He went quiet. Then he asked if we could meet. The next evening, we sat in a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I brought my laptop, not because I wanted to prove anything dramatically, but because I knew what 6 years sounded like without records. I showed him the payment history. Same mortgage servicer, same amount, month after month. Then a few larger charges for the furnace, plumbing, and deck repairs. Elliot stared at the screen. If you've been paying for the house, why am I getting it? I closed the laptop. Because you have children. His expression tightened. My kids have a house. That's what your aunt said. He rubbed both hands over his face. I knew they were favoring me. I looked at him. I should have said more at Andrea's office. I didn't because it benefited me, and I told myself they could leave their property wherever they wanted. That part is true. Yeah. He glanced at the laptop. But I didn't know you were financing the favor. That was the first honest thing anyone had said about the arrangement. Mom called him again the following morning. I know because Elliot called me afterward. She wants me to take over the mortgage. What did you say? No. I laughed once, mostly from surprise. She reminded me the house is going to me, and I told her someday. Maybe. It's still their house now. He paused. Besides, they can change that trust whenever they want. Why would I start paying a 20-year loan because of a future promise? It was the exact practical question nobody had bothered asking when the future promise had been mine. Mom accused me of turning him against them. Elliot stopped her. Paige didn't turn me against anybody. You asked me for money. And that's how I found out she'd been paying all along. He also told her something I hadn't expected. If you keep the trust exactly the way it is, don't tell yourself you're doing it for me. That didn't make him a hero. He had still sat quietly while I was given nothing, but at least now he understood what his silence had cost someone else for the next several months. Mom and Dad made their own mortgage payments. They could afford them. That was important. Nobody was losing the house because I stopped paying, but for the first time, they were seeing what their retirement budget actually looked like without me inside it. Mom mentioned dipping into savings twice. Dad started talking about utility bills. I didn't lecture them. I didn't tell them to sell. When Mom finally said, "We may have to think about the house," I answered carefully. Then decide based on what you can afford, not on what you assume I'll cover. A week later, Dad sent me a message. We're meeting with a retirement planner Friday. For the first time in 6 years, they were planning a future that didn't start with my bank account. The retirement planner's name was Hannah Cho. She didn't tell my parents to sell the house. She didn't have to. She just put the numbers on one page. Their retirement income was respectable, but the house was expensive in ways they had stopped noticing because I had absorbed the biggest bill. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, maintenance, future repairs without my payment. Keeping the house meant either drawing down savings faster or cutting other parts of their life hard enough to make staying there feel like a punishment. Dad understood first. We're paying for 4 bedrooms we don't use. Mom looked at him like he had betrayed the building itself. This is our home. I know. Colleen spent Christmas here. I know. The kids know this house. I know. So did I. I knew every creak in the upstairs hallway and exactly where afternoon light hit the kitchen floor. But memories didn't make a mortgage disappear. A month later, my parents listed the house. They asked around $545,000 and accepted an offer close to that. After the remaining mortgage, closing costs, moving expenses, and everything else was settled. They walked away with enough equity to buy a smaller 2-bedroom patio home for under $300,000 and still keep a healthy reserve. Nobody was homeless. Nobody was ruined. They simply stopped living in a house that only worked because someone else was quietly paying for it. I helped them pack. I compared moving companies. I read through the homeowners association documents on the new place because Mom hated fine print. What I didn't do was write a check. The first time she asked, "Should we upgrade the movers so they'll pack the kitchen too?" She stopped herself. Then she said, "We'll decide if we want to pay for that." I noticed the word "we." So did she. Selling the house also changed the estate plan. The trust no longer held the big family home everyone had been arguing about. Now there was the smaller property, remaining cash from the sale, and whatever investments my parents had left. Elliot called me 2 weeks after the move. "Aunt Lorraine wants to go back to Andrea." "Okay, I told her you need to be there." That surprised me. At the first meeting, I had been invited so I could hear how thoroughly I'd been excluded. This time, Elliot had insisted I be included before anyone signed anything. We sat in the same office again. Andrea opened a new draft. Mom had changed her position. Sort of. She proposed leaving me a fixed amount, then giving most of the remaining estate to Elliot. I didn't even have to ask why. Mom explained it herself. Elliot has children. I still think that matters. I felt the old argument beginning again in a nicer suit. Before I could answer, Elliot leaned forward. Stop using my kids to explain why Paige deserves less. Mom stared at Elliot. What is that supposed to mean? It means my kids aren't a reason Paige should get less. She folded her hands. Paige has a career. She has her condo. She's secure. So am I. Mom frowned. That isn't the point. It is exactly the point. Elliot leaned back. My children have parents. They have a home. They don't need Paige's inheritance. I looked at him, then at Mom. I'm not asking to be paid back for helping you. Dad finally spoke. No one said you were. I know. But you keep acting like because I can survive without anything. That makes it reasonable to leave me nothing. Dad looked down. We were worried about Elliot. Why? He hesitated. After Colleen died, he didn't have much family left on that side. Your mother always felt he needed a safety net. I looked at him. And me? Dad's eyes met mine. For once, he didn't look away. We thought you were the safety net. The room went still. I felt something inside me settle, not anger, recognition. I'm your daughter, Dad, not the net under everyone else. Mom's face changed. She looked older suddenly. I promised Colleen I would always look out for Elliot. I understand that. She was scared before she died. She kept asking what would happen to him. And you should have protected him. Mom blinked. But you could have protected him without erasing me. Elliot nodded. And you never asked whether I wanted protecting this way. That was the part Mom hadn't considered. She had made one child responsible and another child dependent, all in the name of fairness. Andrea quietly turned the draft back toward herself. By the end of the meeting, Mom and Dad agreed to revise the trust again after their own retirement, health care, and final expenses came first. Whatever remained would be divided equally between Elliot and me. Mom asked if I wanted some of the house sale proceeds to repay what I had spent over the years. I shook my head. Keep it for retirement. I'm not asking for 6 years back. She looked at me carefully. Then what are you asking for? Don't assume the 7th. Mom's eyes filled. I thought because you were strong. You could absorb it. I held her gaze. Being able to survive something doesn't make it okay to do. This time, nobody argued. 10 months later, Mom and Dad were settled into their smaller place. Dad liked having less yard to maintain. Mom still missed the old house. And sometimes I did too. But their bills were manageable now. So were mine. The $1,475 that used to leave my account every month stayed with me. I increased my retirement contributions, rebuilt my savings faster, and started thinking about what I wanted my own next home to look like someday. Elliot and I talked more too. Not about the trust, mostly about normal things we probably should have been talking about all along. One Sunday, Mom called. Would you look at these insurance options with me? Then she paused. I mean, look, not pay. I laughed. So you are learning. Slowly. Our relationship wasn't magically repaired. There were still moments I wished my parents had understood what they were doing before money forced them to look at it, but helping them felt different now. It was something I chose, not something automatically deducted from being their daughter. My parents had always been free to leave their money wherever they wanted. I just finally understood that freedom worked both ways. If you were in my position, would you have stopped paying the mortgage the moment you learned you were being left out? Or would you have kept helping because they were still your parents? And what would you have done if you were Elliot accepted the inheritance? Or refused to benefit from a system you finally understood was unfair? Tell me in the comments, because I think people will see this one very differently. If this story made you think about family, money, boundaries, and what fair really means, please like the video and subscribe. There are more stories like this coming, and I'd love to have you here for the next one.